Hello, this is a bit of a help that I've set up for you to help to understand a bit about the Nova Scotia for genealogy and a bit of the history and a little bit how to research the province from my own studies and from doing a lot of genealogy in that area, and that's where I'm from. You can see by this map, the Google map, where the Nova Scotia here is located in comparison to New York and Maine, and just to get you an idea of where this is situated within Canada, right on the far eastern shores. So I'm going to zoom in here. In Nova Scotia, and I'm talking both, I guess, historically and geologically, or whatever you want to call it, or geography-wise, not geology, but geography-wise. The province was first initially started, the first settlement was right down here in this area, okay, and near Annapolis Royal. It was called Port Royal, not to be mistaken, which many people are, with a Port Royal that is up here near Ayrshire, but there is no Port Royal now except an old fort. So if you have family saying from Port Royal from the 1800s, there is no Port Royal then. But the original French settlers, the Acadians, came in here, and this is their first settlement here. And all of the settlements for the French Canadians in before the English even came for hundreds of years were along the waterways. So there was all along here, not so much right there, but all through this bay and right here was a Grand Pre, which is famous for the expulsion of the Acadians, is right in this area. Up here near Truro, there were communities all along through here. There's communities up here near Amherst, Beaubassin, and there's different places up near Moncton. It's called Moncton now, but this was also French area up through here. There were also French communities. And right on the other side through here, these all, of course, were all French, mostly fishing. They did some farming up in this area through here. They used dikes like they did over in Europe, and they reclaimed land, and this was farmed land here before, for very good farmed land actually. And so all the way up through here in Cape Breton, right about where my mouse is where Louisbourg is, which was the fort for the turned from English to the French to the English many times. But Louisbourg is a sort of a famous fort for Nova Scotia. So Halifax at that time was not established. Okay, so although that's the main city now, and there's a place here called Chesapeake where the French were. The French were up through this area right in here, farming in this area here. A lot of French people in this area, and all through here. This is the main area, the St. Peter's, Ayrshire area, Lordways. This is one of the main French areas, and a small community up in here. And the French, of course, went into PEI, Prince Edward Island, or PEI. This was French area as well. So this was all part of l'Acadie before the English. So the English were down in the down here in the Maine, further down in Boston, and that where the English were. The French had this their territory until the English, in numerous wars, mainly overseas, but they conquered the French and took over these areas. So the first area that they took over was down here, Port Royal, all through this area up through to Wolfville. That was the first main area, the main body of Nova Scotia they took over, and the French remained up in this area. So during the expulsion of the Acadians in 17, around the 1750s, they were taken from here and sent back to France, and some went to Louisiana. After they went to France, they either came back to Nova Scotia or they went to Louisiana, which was French territory at that time. So when the French lost the war finally, and Cape Breton was taken. This is Cape Breton. When Cape Breton was taken and Prince Edward Island fell to the English as well, then the English felt that there were too many French people still living in Nova Scotia for them to be able to rule it. They felt they'd have problems, so they brought a lot of people from New England, my ancestors actually, but they brought many people from New England. This is before the U.S. was formed as a country, right? This is during the colony time, and so they offered free land for people to come up and take the land, which they kicked the French off of, all especially up through this area here, was settled. The French still remained in some areas, like here and down along the South Shore, or down this area, but the big bulk of the French population was moved out of this area, and it was given over to the English. So they had English settlers who were called planters that came in, and this is about 25 years before the American Revolution, and they settled there. But they also brought into this area right here, where you see Mahone Bay and Lunenburg and Bridgewater and all down this area here, they brought in a lot of people from Germanic background. So there's a lot of German families all through this area. This is all German ancestry. If you have ancestors from this area, you're going to find that they're all German. And so the English settlement started mainly in the valley, right here, the Annapolis Valley, a little bit up in Truro, and then Halifax was formed, and then Halifax ended up becoming the largest city in the province. But to understand that there's really the three areas, or the three groups of, for family history purposes, there's really three, there's the English, the French, and the Germanic backgrounds. There's a little smattering of a few other people, but that's basically those three groups. And you find all the Germanic background people all in this area right here. The French Canadian are all on the outer, sort of the outskirts. So all along here is still French Canadian. They still are areas that speak some French there. All through this area is still French Canadian, and up here, up to the north, up here, there's French Canadian. There's still a little bit in PEI, and there's some here in this little area right through here. But the French Canadian names and their family names, most of the French Canadian people had two family names. They had one for French and one for English once they, of course, were under the British. So the LeBlancs became the Whites, and the Petitpas became the Pits. So if you have family that have come from Canada, especially from Nova Scotia, and gone to New England or wherever, you'll find these names that really are French. And if you come and your name is Pitts or your name is White, and you come to Nova Scotia and start looking for a White, you'll have a very hard time finding them, since they weren't Whites there, they were LeBlancs, okay? And so it really helps to understand this French-English background for the names, because the English names, of course, stayed more or less the same. So if someone was an Eaton or a Stewart or whatever their name was, those names did not really change that much. They're the same names that were brought overseas from Britain, or even if they came up from Britain through the States into Canada. But for the French Canadians, they basically had two names. So my wife's name was Pitre, and they go by Peters. And so all the French, so that is very important if you're going to have some Acadian family, that you understand which of those lines and and there are online, there are places to go and find those names and what the English is to the French name. But you'll find on the censuses and on a lot of even on marriage records, they're sometimes in the French and sometimes they're in the English name. And that goes as well for their given, not just their surnames, but also for given names as well. So it is a little bit tricky, but once you start to know what the name is, then you start to then you search for both of those things and you'll find both those names. So this will help you to understand a little bit about, so if your ancestors are English speaking, they probably came to Nova Scotia late 1700s. The bulk of them came late 1700s, and then a big group into the 1800s. The late 1700s, the Loyalists came. That's the people that were in the U.S. that were British, that didn't want to become part of the U.S. They're called Loyalists, and who were loyal to the Crown. They came up to Canada, to this area, and in Ontario and other parts of Canada, but they were given land, and they were called the Loyalists. So you have the planters, then you have the Loyalists, and then after those two groups, then there was just a great inflow of people from Ireland and Scotland, and mainly Ireland and Scotland, and England, that came through to Nova Scotia and settled there, all through Halifax and all through the province. But most English-speaking names, you're going to find that your relatives were from 1800, late 1700s to 18. But if you're from French Canadian background, chances are your family's been there from late 1600s. So you would have a lot of relatives. They're very much were interconnected families, and the people did not move very much in those days. They didn't travel very far. The people, if they were French Canadian from up here in St. Peter's and Arichat, they married basically within that area, right? If they were from this area near Antigonish, which is French, and they basically, not Antigonish, but the communities right near there, are French Canadian. And again, they did not intermarry very much with the English people. They basically married among the French generally. There'd be about 5 or 10% that did not. One of the interesting facts for the French Canadians is that because they were fishermen, and a lot of the, especially up in this area, there's a lot of fishing up in here and down on the South Shore. A lot of these people ended up in Boston area. A lot. 50% of their family ended up in Boston area. So if you're in the Boston, Massachusetts, a little bit in Rhode Island, and a little bit in Connecticut, but mainly Massachusetts. They just, because I think the owner of the fish factories were from Massachusetts, and so there was once people started going down there, I think they said, my family's down there and friends down there, so I'm just going to go try it out. And then there's these large families that they had. The French Canadian family, probably on average, was 8 to 10 kids, and they just kept going. Especially after the mid to late 1800s and into the early 1900s, there was just a huge out migration. The French Canadians, which is interesting, the French Canadians did not go to Halifax very much, a little bit, not very much. They basically went to Massachusetts. They didn't go to Ontario or out west in Canada at all. They went to Massachusetts. So New England is super connected to Nova Scotia. If you're in New England, chances are you have relatives that are in Nova Scotia. And there was just so much cross movement between these places, back and forth, up and down, and I hope that gives you a basic understanding of Nova Scotia and the background, and to help you with your family history. There are two other groups of people that I really would like to just quickly cover as well while I'm speaking about Nova Scotia. And that is, of course, the original inhabitants of Nova Scotia, which were the Micmac, the native people from this area were called the Micmac. And there are still Micmac living all through Nova Scotia, and many, of course, have intermarried with the people that were there, and there are still some Micmac that are living on the various reservation areas within Nova Scotia. The native people of Nova Scotia, from the time the French got there, the French were, very much willing to intermarry and deal with the native people in a very different way than the English did in most of the rest of North America. The French were much more willing to, as I said, intermarry with them, and so there is definitely Mi'kmaq or Micmac blood in among the inhabitants of Nova Scotia, especially among the French, and as you get back in those, this is back 200-300 years. The records aren't that clear as to who was and who was not. So, a lot of people in their family history say they are native or they're Mi'kmaq or whatever, but it's not that easy to find that link. And so the Mi'kmaq lived, as I said, all through the province, in the PEI, and they're in New Brunswick as well. So that was a large native group there, and very good people. And if you have family that are Mi'kmaq, then there are certain names that go along with the Mi'kmaq people as well. And I just have not done a lot of work with that group, and so I'm not that familiar with that. And maybe I will do a segment on that as I do get to know that a little bit better. The other group that I should mention as well is the black people that came up from the States, and there's quite a large group of really, really good people that I have friends that their family came up from the States and from different places, and actually some from the islands of the Caribbean as well. But with the slavery issue in the States, and also with work and trade and everything else, there was quite a large group of black people that ended up living in Halifax and still do. Their story is certainly not a great, any more than it is in the U.S. It's not a great history. It's a wonderful history for them, but there was definitely some racism and things that happened in the British-run areas of before Canada was made, and when Canada came about, it was still there as well. I had a friend that was a black lady I used to visit. She's passed away now, but she remembers back in the '60s that they had a separate place in the theater where where the black people sat separate from the white, and that was only in the 60s, 1960s, so that's not that long ago, I guess, depending on how old or young you are. So anyway, so just a quick other thing, the Sydney area, which is one of the larger areas of Canada, was definitely much stronger. I mean, still a fairly decent sized community, but it really was the mining capital of this whole area, and we had a lot of mining families came in from Europe to work there, and that's up here in this area here. The Halifax area we've already mentioned. Guysborough County here, again, this, and then there's Antigonish County. There's different counties throughout Nova Scotia down through the South Shore as well. And the family names, even among the French or the English names, you'll find that certain names of the French will be, the Camots, and you'll find them more in one area, and you'll find the Boudreaux more in the Arichat area, and you'll find the Jesse or Joyce family more here, and then you'll find the Richards more down here. So there's different names, that are from different areas of the province. And anyway, that's just a quick, not that quick, I suppose, but that is just a basic rundown of Nova Scotia. And I will try to make some other videos of maybe a little more in depth on some of these groups of people and these areas to help with your family history work. Thanks, and have a good day. Take care. Bye.